First of all, me, Mr. Parks, Mr. Ebner, for allowing me the time that I talk with local leadership about what I'm hoping to do in my term of office, and also to ask for your help on behalf of the community. So I was elected in November. My office is set up now. It's in McCandless. Catherine Weiss, who you see there, is one of my staff. And we started constituent services. I had my first town hall. We're continuing to do events around the district. I'll be having my first general town hall on April 17th at the Beatty Center. You may or may not be familiar with the chaos about how the start of the term in the state house has been. It's a very closely divided chamber. There were empty seats. There are again empty seats, but we are finally organized with leadership. I've been assigned to committees that you might imagine being a physician by background. I've been assigned to the health-related committees, to health insurance and professional licensure, which I think are the ones where I can be most effective on behalf of our community. My primary goal, in fact, really my only goal, is to make sure that I represent the community as best as I can, and that I am open to the voices that are in our community. I represent a very diverse area, from extraordinarily working class areas in parts of Hampton Township and Emsworth, very affluent areas here in Franklin Park. And so my goal is to really represent the entire community as best I can. My primary ask of all of you is, I don't know what I don't know. I need to hear from you as the local elected leadership. What are the priorities for Franklin Park when it comes to our state government? Because that is what I need to represent. There is not a Republican or Democrat road or ambulance or bridge or sewer system. And I know I'm talking to your colleagues in other communities that these local concerns don't fall into a partisan bucket. They fall into Franklin Park needs this, McCandless needs this, and we need to move forward. So really need to hear that. In a very tangible way, we are starting budget season now in the state government. We have to pass our budget by June 30th. Unlike in previous years, this will have to be a very compromised budget for a couple of reasons. We have a new governor. We have a new majority in the House. We continue to have a Republican majority in the Senate. That means that both sides are going to need to come to the table in order to get things done. The other political reality, which I think works in favor of our community, is that politically, it is very likely that the budget will pass in each chamber on a partisan basis. That's just the nature of the politics in Harrisburg. So it will require all 102 votes from the Democrats in the House. It will require all the Republican votes from the Senate, and obviously the governor's signatures. What that means is that every one of us in the state House will need to be active in the budget process, even if I'm not on the appropriations committee, but every one of us is going to be active. And what that translates to tangibly for Franklin Park is I will be making requests to the budget process by mid-April to early May. And I need to hear from every community what exactly they need in terms of specific appropriation requests. So whether it's something to do with this building, whether it has to do with the sewer system, whether it has to do with anything with green space, please communicate with my office. I've met with your leadership already on a number of these issues. The bicentennial for Franklin Park, for example. If I don't ask for it, we certainly won't get it. Because I ask doesn't mean that we will get it, but if I don't ask, we'll need to do that. I'll also emphasize that I have a very good working relationship with Senator Robinson, who represents Franklin Park. We work together on a number of issues. We talk very regularly. And both of us have, Franklin Park at heart in terms of how we are thinking about advocating for our community in Harrisburg. The last thing I'll mention is that my door is always open. My office is open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So I have satellite office hours in Emsworth twice a month as well. Your leadership here has my cell phone number, and I will certainly leave it. And please, for those who have it, please share it with your leadership across the board to communicate with me at any time. And more than that, I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, Tom.
one of the things that, and you've probably heard this already, and I'm sure every municipality could always use that funding.
Sure.
So that's, we're not going to go there on just.
That's okay to go there.
But one of the things I've been sitting on council here since 2015, and 10 years prior to that, I was on the North Allegheny School Board. So I've been involved with budgeting and watching things occur over many years with the numbers. One of the things that in Franklin Park that was picking the healthcare one, there's a real problem with the ambulances going on. I mean, it's just like, I got a letter from them to donate to.
So did I. And I would encourage people who feel they can to do so.
And I do. I always tell everybody there's two things I really like to support: it's the fire company and the ambulance. Volunteers are very located people that, and then obviously the ambulance authority we know is really struggling.
Right.
And I think from what I hear, and I'm not well versed, I don't go to those meetings. I think some of the reason they're struggling is that there are restrictions on what they can bill for. I mean, if they go to the team and they don't do anything, or they treat somebody in the ambulance but don't transport them, they're not allowed to bill. They dispatch or vehicle, they have paid employees, or running schools, and using medical supply, and they can bill them to zero. And I'm not saying that they should, if that's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that you would think they would get some funding or some compensation for responding to things like that. And I don't know, I don't think our area in the North Hills here or in Western Pennsylvania is unique in that fact, but probably from a healthcare perspective, probably statewide people are struggling like that.
So there's three things that I'll say in response, and I agree with everything that you said. The first is, as you know, I'm an emergency physician. I served on the ambulance authority board before I became our state representative, so very familiar with these issues and the budgetary constraints. My first priority in terms of trying to bring funding to this community has been to bring funding to our first responders, or police, fire, and EMS. The first thing I did, and Reed is very aware of this, is we received a grant on my election, and I funneled half of it to the ambulance authority because I felt that it was extraordinarily important. And I will continue to do so. And and in addition to talking to all the communities, I'm talking to the school districts that I represent and the fire, EMS, and police agencies that I represent to make sure that they're part of the budgetary response that we move forward. The second thing I will say is that I think you and Franklin Park have been the most responsible community on this issue compared to the other communities that are in the ambulance authority. And I say that as a resident of McCandless, is you have shown a consistent commitment to recognizing exactly what you said. No one does a wallet biopsy when someone calls 911. They, expect that the ambulance is going to be there. No one is expecting payment when 911 is called originally, but there's a cost to this service, and so it requires community protectivity. I frankly have been very, very disappointed that if other communities outside of actually my district, the Watershed, Bradford Woods, and Pine, have not provided any type of financial support to the ambulance authority, despite benefiting rightly so from those services. McCandless provides in-kind contributions. I will certainly push at the state legislative level on this issue. I advocated for the very limited legislation that already exists that allows for some payment, even in the case of non-transport. But the next step is also going to be about reimbursement directly to the ambulance authority, as opposed to checks getting sent to individuals who called 911 and then they're expected to forward that check to the ambulance authority. Frankly, that's outrageous. It doesn't even make sense, and it put the ambulance authority in a very tenuous financial position. So as part of this budgetary request, one of the things I am pointing out, and I will say this in full candor, I don't think the governor's budget did enough to recognize the consequences of COVID and the fact that we need to bolster our first responders and our EMS agencies because they're in crisis, not only here, but across the state. So I will certainly push that. I would strongly urge you as a municipal leadership to talk with your colleagues who are also served by the ambulance authority, McCandless, Bradford Woods, and Pine, and say, we're contributing financially, McCandless is contributing financially. what are you doing? Because this is a service that isn't sustainable without, municipal support. And then the last point I would make is, it's always an individual decision what to contribute to, but people assume that the EMS agency is a municipal function like the police. It's not. It's meant to be self-sustained, and we can debate whether that's the case or not. But until that, there is a steady revenue source. Our communities have made the decision to have a per capita, fee for EMS. Personally, I would support that, but it's not my call to make. It's the local community's calls to make. Until that happens, I would strongly urge you to use every persuasive voice that you have as leadership to urge your residents to contribute to the EMS.
I'm a personal friend of my Carl here. And we worked at EPMC. He was a contractor, and I was at EPMC rock on construction. So Mike and I go back like 25 years. And I had a long talk with him about 2 weeks ago. And I said, Mike, why isn't McCandless come on board with this? And he said, oh, I think we will. He said, I'm really optimistic. And I said, well, that's not what the feedback we're getting. And I kind of dragged his feet through the fire a little bit. It was a social event we were at, and I just said, this is not something that's going to go away. I mean, McCandless, all municipalities, if I understand the rules, you're obligated to provide somebody 911 service.
Correct.
Right.
It's not optional.
Yeah.
Right. As a member of council, we are obligated to see the safety of our business. Right.
So I don't understand. I mean, Franklin Park has contributed, as you've already acknowledged, and I'm not sure why the other ones don't understand that. It seems like a lot of stall techniques, tactics, and stuff they're doing.
In the process of doing excruciating projects, which are actually, in fact, unnecessary.
Thank you.
Because it's
When
obvious.
I was on the ambulance authority for this consulting agreement to study the ambulance authority and pay for that from the municipality, and said, why did you put the money towards the ambulance authority? Because rather than spend money to tell you what you already know, which is that if someone expects 911 to be there, regardless of their ability to pay, then it has to be supported by the community as a whole. So you won't get any argument from me. And I think this is what I can do at the state level is obviously legislatively about the direct payment issue, about the support of EMS. But it is going to require, frankly, a struggle among the municipalities that are served by MFPAA to say, everybody has to contribute, otherwise we cannot sustain this. And this is not something that is a distant problem. There are two EMS agencies in Northeast Allegheny County that are on the edge of closing, and those communities have decided to enact a per capita fee for EMS. And they're not as well off as the communities that are served by the Franklin Park. And so right now they have reserves, but at the pace that they were going, and that was when I was on the board just last year, they're a year and a half away from the community saying we're insolvent, and that would be a much bigger crisis than what we're facing now.
I'm glad you're here to get all over.
Yeah. So I will do my part, but I think it does require the communities that are served to come together and say, unfortunately, it's going to require some butting heads.
Thank you.
I know that last year, at the beginning of this calendar, we came up with a letter, outlining the kind of legislation. I think if we haven't done that,
Please do, because I haven't seen that, but I'd be happy to see that, and especially, and make your request as specific as possible. The more specific, the better, because even if it doesn't include it in the budget, there is a process for identifying. So, for example, the Northland Library clearly is a priority for this community. I got notice, and, is this a priority for you? And of course, my answer was yes. And then we reported $1 million from the Northland Public Library. I'm not saying it because of me, but my voice helps with that. That's part of my responsibility. So please send that to me. Please make it as specific as possible.
They were so many years behind with the capital. Their needs, when I look at the building, their need for
it's terrible. And so, and it's such a resource for the community, so it's very important.
Not all of the priorities are really budget requests. There's some things like the MS.
Yeah.
The fact that the borough took over stormwater facilities under the state roads.
I have an idea about on this board. I never heard it. But yeah. No, I hear you. And I said this to leadership when I met a month ago, that as an emergency organization, I'm very sensitive to unfunded mandates. I have no desire to impose new lines on this community or anywhere else that I represent. And so, again, this goes back to, I don't know, if there's something coming down the tracks that is an unfunded mandate and I don't recognize it, please tell me so that I can move it.
Thank you.
I just want to say, we have done our due diligence trying to bring this community from what we have, and doing it for 2 years. But so far, we've had success. But we'll keep working on it.
Well, like I said, I'm certainly, this is something that's close to my heart, with, my professional background. And so whatever I can do or my office can do to help facilitate that, I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to talk, Representative Mercury represents Marshall, Bradford, Woods, and Pine. We've had conversations about this. It's something where I don't know that there's a choice at this point. I think everybody's just got to take the lead and say, we either have a high quality EMS agency, which our citizens expect, or we don't. It's that simple.
And if you are talking to those other towns, we can get up our contributions about $10 per annum this year, I think.
Yeah.
We're giving them the rest.
Like I said, before, I think Franklin Park has been the sole responsible party on this. McCandless, to a lesser extent, has given its responsibilities. So I don't know if the other items have.
A little bit of history on that. We were asked by a candidate to facilitate a meeting of all the parties involved. And Legion and I, approximately 6 weeks ago, didn't have a conference with the campus manager and the reading was doing kind of great. Now in the room for the Madden House, the executives of those communities together to meet, and I was going to do that. The managers of the meeting, because we don't want to do anything until we've done all these audits. And it's a stumbling block, and I'm not sure that it's being communicated effectively with the executive level. And
Right now, the meetings like it's down every 2 weeks, kind of line item by line item, the consultant's report. I've been skipping those meetings, it's a total waste of my time.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, Chris, we had when I was on the ambulance authority board, we had our own issues when it came to our internal management, that it needed to be more robust. I have every confidence in the world in Christelle. I think he's bringing an incredible track record and an incredible dedication to that. So that house is in order now. I think if I had to be completely honest, I think there's a real fear in especially Marshall, Bradford, Woods, and Pine to say to their community, this is going to require some type of per capita amount to do this. That's their politics, it's not our politics. Just to say, you're going to have to make that decision clear. When I was sitting on the ambulance authority board, I said, look, if we get to the point where we're going to go insolvent unless we support communities, then I think we have to say to the community, the ones who are supporting the service are the ones who are going to get the service. That is the last possible resort. And I think that needs to be communicated frankly by all of you, your counterparts in Marshall, Bradford, Woods, and Pine, to say, what the math doesn't work. This is just a math problem. There's nothing else to say.
we'll continue.
Any other questions that I can answer? I don't want to take up too much of your time.
We'll be in touch for sure.
Yes, we might go, man. There's some volunteer fire companies that are running agencies just for calling us. the key drop to be certified.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
And we have a good fire department and it's turned over consideration to generate. I think right now. But overall, it's just something to be concerned about.
Right.
And, is there an attitude in Harrisburg relating to volunteer fire?
There's a recognition of the problem, but they have to put their money where their mouth is. So the governor in his budget identified police, teachers, and nursing as three professions that he wanted to incentivize, like tax incentives to professionalize. The problem with the plan is that he's tying it to licensure or certification as opposed to actual practice. So, again, as a physician, someone who has a license doesn't mean they're actually doing something at the bedside. And the same thing is true with, I'm sure, police, and the same thing is true with teachers. I've spoken with Senator Robinson. He'd like to extend that to EMS and fire, which I think makes a lot of sense. It is going to require an accountability to make sure that anyone who gets those incentives is actually doing the work. And so, yes, there is a recognition of the problem. Yes, we're hearing stories every day in more and more communities where this is becoming on the verge or already in collapse. Whether there's a willingness to put money where their mouth is on that, or you're willing to do that, I don't know the answer to that. And I think if you can extend that program to fire and EMS, if you make it more accountable than just licensure, if you make it based on actually doing the work. So that is what I push my colleagues on, and will continue to push my colleagues on.
There is an existing tax incentive for fire, but it's minimal in the administration and zoning.
Yeah.
Between the two, it's
Yeah, right. So I think that's where, it needs to be crafted in a way that, like you said, it's not onerous and it actually gets the bang for the buck that we need. I think that's just the truth.
Any other questions? You did.
Yeah, I think that's fine with some of the. But when they have municipalities and use of radar
Yeah, we brought that up.
as a legislative.
Yeah. So I don't understand why Pennsylvania is the only state that does not have a local police radar. Pennsylvania does a lot of things in a very unique way. I have to say. So it's, I have not seen the legislation come up even as filed as a co-sponsor with memo like this, which is surprising. I think it will come up. I think this is where it lies. So there's two complaints about this. One, I think it's totally bogus, that it's used as a revenue source for municipalities. You don't speed, or you're not going to get this. So I think that's ridiculous. The other one, which I think is somewhat ridiculous, but it's a real concern, not in this community, but I've heard it from my colleagues in other parts of the state, is the impression of the trust between the police and the community. I don't think we have that at all, but there are colleagues of mine in other parts of the state who say they are wary of anything that might result in more police community interaction. I think that's a mistake. I think the devil is always in the details on this legislation, but I don't see a reason on its face where if it comes up, I would not support having radar for our local police, because I don't understand. And I think it's a public safety concern. I've heard in this community, I've heard in the Canlis, I've heard in the river boroughs, safety issues when it comes to speeding and the like. It's a real problem. We know the tragedy in the Canlis recently of someone who died in a hit and run. I think, I'd ask your police chief, but I assume that this is something that you would desperately want to see in terms of a tool for your police officers.
We already have three radars. We anticipated a couple of years ago that they would pass.
Yeah.
I mean, when they do, and if they ever do, there'll be a run on radar.
Right.
Ones that are certified to use.
Right.
With the thousands of police departments in Pennsylvania. Logos, they'll all just be trying to be trained. So we have brand new ones down there just waiting.
Yeah.
So the thing about the revenue generation is, we use Vascar stopwatches now.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping me from clicking out as fast as I want and saying you went that.
Right.
Because here it is on the display, right?
Right.
Can't do that with a radar.
Yeah.
If an object isn't traveling at that speed, it's not going to say the speed.
Right.
can't put a speed on a radar.
You don't have to convince me.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, yeah.
So the latest vote on the table right at the moment, 459,
Okay, if it was filed, is it House Bill 459?
it's Senate Bill 459.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything in the
Well, I
House.
have that, I can forward it.
Sure, please feel free to forward it to me. It's just rep.kid@pahouse.net.
No, I have your, I have that.
But I haven't seen a House equivalent, and this is there, the other thing about that I've discovered in the General Assembly, it's not just Republican and Democrat, it's House and Senate. There are things that pass unanimously in the Senate and never show up in the House or vice versa, and it's very idiosyncratic, so, I'm still trying to feel my way on that, so this may very well be an example that.
Yeah, I'll get that.
So,
to you.
yeah, please do.
I serve on the executive board, so Jim Nowak, our leader, he's optimistic this year, so we're trying to be optimistic with him.
It's always optimistic at the beginning of session. So,
I'll get that.
yeah. Any other questions that I can answer?
You Dave, no more. No.
That's it for now.
Well, like I said, thank you so much for allowing me to come. Thank you for your service to the Franklin Park community. Please reach out at any time. And like I said, by early to mid-April, and any specific requests that I can put into the budgetary process, I'll be happy to do so. As well as things that you don't want to see. That's as important as well. If there are things that may show up in the budget that you don't want to see in the budget, I'm happy to express that as well. All right, well, thank you so much. Have a great one. Take care.
Not ours.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if not, Jim. No, new business, Max, you're on.
Good boy.
Agenda.
All right, so we'll go from the bottom to the top, just to address some new items. As you'll see at the very bottom, motion 20. This is an ongoing project. This is tied into Allegheny County's participation in the national opioid settlement, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania through the Attorney General. There's been some steps. We just received a notification that the next step in the claim process is coming up, and so to authorize or reauthorize the borough manager to continue to input data into the claims process. We've added this motion just in case they have a question of who you are and what are you doing in terms of giving us population numbers and things like that. It's structured that municipalities over 10,000 are eligible, so we just made the cutoff. And if you recall, this is the part of one of the many settlements. There was a bit of a fight between the district attorney and the county in terms of the participation, but this one has been moving forward, and I believe it involves a lot of the distributors in terms of Walgreens, CVS, but also the pharmacy manufacturers. So, continuing with that one, the other items going backwards, we do have Squire Ridge 3, Willow Ridge, close to being done, but not quite there yet. So we have the notions referencing the borough engineers reports there. As we discussed in executive session, we do have the motion to hire a full-time police officer through the civil service process in terms of the eligibility list. Motion 11 is a bit of a mouthful. My apologies to whoever has to read that one. Tom, all right. Having to do with, yes, a third glass of water. This one, we've had some discussions about the two alternates that were put out to bid in addition to the curb and gutter work. These are first for Summerfield, both the developer's portion and the borough's portion. At this time, we want to be able to crunch those numbers a little bit more. We have actual numbers. It is the same lowest bidder, but we weren't prepared to make the award right now. So the Public Works contract law says we need to award within 60 days of bid opening or 120 days in certain circumstances. But we have been through Sean and Kevin in touch with the bidder to see how long, will they waive any of those requirements, and they agreed to leave it open until that July 11th, 2023 date. So we'll talk about it executive or future work session. At least that portion, the main portion is what is being awarded tonight. Emma Gross, still moving along. We've added an addendum to extend their completion period for an additional year, as well as increase to the 2,740 performance bond. So we've got that set up as motions 8 and 9. Motions 6 and 7 have to do with the YMCA and the pavilion. The land development is the second approval. We will have a conditional use hearing. Hopefully it will be smoother and shorter than previous ones in the past, but we have the preliminary exhibits set up for that. We'll hear a presentation hopefully from the applicant. But if they don't show up because we're the property owner, maybe we can make it up and go forward. But that one should hopefully go smoothly. Moving on to the old business items, we have Cardinal Ridge, which is motion 4. We have amended the resolution to reflect the updated review letters from the engineer. I believe Tim, but as we talked about at the work session, it has been reviewed at the planning commission and recommended again for approval. I will talk on that because it came up again on Yocus. We're still having status conferences with Judge James on the Yocus condemnation action. And he does like to opine whenever he talks about Franklin Park about the Sturbridge court case. And he mentioned it again during the wrap up of our status conference on Monday. And in that case, was the extension of Sturbridge, which got longer and longer, as we know. But at one point, there wasn't all the restrictions we had in the ordinance with respect to length of cul-de-sacs and things of that nature. And the application came up for a vote. Residents that lived on Sturbridge were opposed to it and made a claim that there needed to be a secondary access to Sturbridge. If anybody knows, unless you have a incline or anything, there's no way to get secondary access or even an emergency access.
This is when they went through the back of the cul-de-sac.
Yes, yes. The first time, there's been a second one since then. There was no reason to deny the plan. The plan was denied by council, went up on appeal. Judge James, in a scathing opinion, overturned us. And the quote that he made on Monday was that, that one was so obvious that an IRA at the time went on and said, there's no reason for you to turn this down, but it got turned down. He said, I would have awarded sanctions in that case had they been requested, but the developer did not request them in that case. So wow, thought that was a little a bit of a refresher, not so much for Yocus because we weren't talking about a land development, we're talking about condemnation and everything else, but that is one that has stuck with him, and he brings it up pretty much every status conference that I go to with the Franklin Park matter. So not the best standard to have to be dealing with. So with that said, in terms of Cardinal Ridge, they should be here again to give another review of answer any questions. But the resolution is in the positive sense. It does grant the approval. There is no, in terms of the staff report and the engineer report, open items or anything we could point to in the ordinance for a potential denial. The only item that's still there is the modification for the length and the separation between Warwick Lane and the driveway. So, I think in terms of what we've been directed to do in previous cases about working with the developer to let them develop a plan that meets the terms of the ordinance. We've done that. We're here January, we're here February, we're here in March. And that's not even counting all the time it was in front of the planning commission, getting up into this point, so. That's all I can really say about that one.
Man, let me interject,
Yes.
Max, to it just a little bit here. I think it's important that if there's votes against that, which there certainly may well be, that we understand the implications. In my mind, they tend to oversimplify things, but I think the critical thing is that if that doesn't pass, I think it opens the door to an appeal, obviously, and that will occur, and ultimately a win by the developer, because we don't have a basis for supporting a denial. So, but we all are concerned currently and long range about the effective development in Franklin Park. And the way in which we can make that better is through the SALDO, through the subdivision and land development ordinance, the basic law that supports that creates the criteria by which we approve these things. I think because we all care about it, and it's always been an issue in the past, and it continues to be one. None of us has been happy about the developments as we see them obliterate the trees, and it breaks my heart. But let's do it through the right process, which is, why don't we all get a copy of that SALDO and take a look and say, how should we amend this to make things more effective? So I'm not trying to influence votes, I'm just trying to imply the criteria by which we need to have in the back of our mind. So.
And that's, I mean, we talked about it a little bit before, the Commonwealth Court decision for this particular property identified that if you have requirements in your ordinance and that they need a modification to meet, you're in a much better place in terms of denying that modification because they didn't put it in writing back in that case. They didn't establish the hardship. They didn't show that the modification is the minimum amount that can let them develop it. So as much as you can tighten up the SALDO, it becomes an issue, if you tighten it too much and nobody could meet the requirements and you do grant a lot of them and the neighbors say, well, they didn't have a hardship, et cetera. But there is a step, and Brian, you're seeing the issue with Deerfield and the suggestion of, well, shouldn't we have a buffer along there, is that type of idea. And unfortunately, a lot of things get tied in with the comp plan, and everybody, you want to do the comp plan first, and then the rewrite or the comprehensive drafting of the SALDO and the zoning based on the comp plan. But there's nothing that prevents targeted amendments addressing issues. That's what we did for this plan the first time when it was overturned. We tightened the ordinance up, put in the numbers, said it was land developments and subdivisions. Said you can't just have a private driveway going from one use to another. So that's how we get a public street in this sense with 26 units rather than 120. So that's all I can say in terms of how it's set up. I've had no conversations since the planning commission. Oftentimes the attorney calls and says, what's going on? We need to change something or otherwise. It's been radio silence since they came through there. So I don't know. I don't have anything else to report of them saying this is their intention. Or
I have heard that they have been approached a lot of the neighbors and we're kind of trying to iron some things out.
that's another good.
And it may be more, less opposition tonight, but I guess we'll see what happens.
Fair enough. If there's 2,000 people there, then they're.
They didn't want.
That's kind of related to that, maybe I should say this, but yesterday I was to the sheets to get gas, and I saw them go across into that office compound that backs up to it to the north face, and I actually never drove back there. It's my first. There's 4 office buildings back there. In building 4, which actually shares the driveway with building 1, they have the very back of that it borders the north face of this property. But when you look at that, you can really clearly see what's going on. How the site is divided into 2 drainage zones, like what that upper north west corner drains into that office complex wetlands, and then the other 2/3 or 3/4 goes the other way. It's pretty specific, the topography and everything that's in there. So and I've actually walked the entire site. I mean, I've pulled into Martha Priest's old driveway and I've walked it. There's actually like trails through there. I think people had quad runners or something. So it's a nice piece of property, and I think it's, and I've been talking about this since I've been on council in 2015, and I think it predates that. So I think this is not a bad use for the property based on where it's at and how they're going to develop it. And, you know, I know we're going to hear about the water coming off. And again, just to be clear on that, whether we had the above ground or the buried tanks, the discharge point remains unchanged. And it coincides exactly with where the water drains off the site now. I mean, I have pictures, and you can see the little stream trickling. It's going to put its water right where the water leaves the site currently. That doesn't look to me like it even moves it a foot. So the water created and discharged is going to be exactly that same spot. I mean, I'm one of those persons, I have to go visualize it in the field and see it so that I'm understanding the discharge points. And if you don't realize there's a wetlands between all those office buildings.
Right.
I saw it on these plans, but I wanted to go into their parking lot and look down and see it. And it's actually quite a large area down in there, to be honest with you. So anyway, I just throw those things out there for the benefit of anybody that if you haven't had time or you want to go over and take a drive into that office park, and you get actually a different view there and different perspective of the project. Thank you.
And remember, it has been denied once before. So, 2 months ago. But, here we are. Yocus, in terms of the status conference, this was one that was scheduled for last month or so. And when the public hearing was continued, Mr. Loeb requested to continue it until Monday. Or actually, he wanted it in general, but Judge James wanted to find out what was going on. So we gave him the update in terms of how the public hearings have been going, let him know it was on the agenda for a vote this evening. My marching orders are to inform the clerk tomorrow as to what happened. I think, in terms of relaying the issues that council is facing here with, neighbors with long memories, a property that has sat like this for so long, lack of motivation other than the condemnation, and hearing this, as the judge said, I can deal with the law, I can deal with that, I can't deal with the politics. I know what happens, in terms of public hearings and otherwise. That's when he went on a tangent on Sturbridge Court, but he recognized that there is work being proposed. Talked about this is something that is being looked at prospectively. We've been trying to focus on the future. We keep getting dragged into the past and the history. We are putting some guide rails in terms of next steps of the process. In terms of Judge James and where he is thinking about for being on the bench for so long, I'm not sure. But he was generally of the view that we're doing the right thing by taking it through the process, that he's doing the right thing by at least applying and spending the money to put the plans together and everything else. We had discussion about, well, what's this mean for the condemnation or otherwise, because I had to correct the judge because he said, well, if he's doing, work here through this application, that what you dinged him for before. And I said, no, that is specifically construction work under a valid building permit. And he hasn't had that for a long time. He's not going to have it tomorrow or the next day. Here, he will get potentially a conditional use approval or denial, or approval with conditions that he needs to appeal. I did let him know that an attorney did show up on behalf of the neighbors, and Judge James sort of lamented the fact that, well, could they appeal? through all this. It's certainly possible, and if they object to the land development later, if they have an interest and show up, although we don't have a public hearing, they have the ability to appeal. Of course, that can be sanctioned too, if they do it for an improper reason or without any basis that can meet the requirements. So that's what we talked about in the time period as well, since the last public hearing. Tim and I talked and we looked at the zoning code because of the reference of, hey, wait, this was a residential property and now it's commercial. Which is true, even though it's allowed and it's R4, okay, they need to follow the setback requirements on the side for a commercial structure. So on Tim's staff report, he added a note to that effect. But when we look at the R4, which is what this district is, the requirements, there's no specific requirement for commercial buildings. So there's nothing to point to say, yes, it's 10 or 20 or whichever way, I said backwards to the judge, along those lines. So it does not seem, that was sort of a bit of a red herring, I think, just thrown out there the other day, that does make some sense that it was residential, now it's commercial, but the code doesn't distinguish between the two in the R4 district. So I don't see him going to the zoning hearing board for variance as part of this.
Interestingly, wasn't the presentation by the applicant didn't include a part where they said that they had found the code that applied. We talked about this and that they were complying with it.
Yes, but that was an overlay. section,
Yes.
so
Yes.
impact this one.
Yes.
So we're still in the same position of, what reason for denial would need to look like. You have a little more flexibility in a conditional use because there are those subjective, criteria of impact on the neighborhood, and there should be some concrete material behind it. And you're free to let him have it. I mean, Mr. Lope's gonna be there. They're probably told him the public hearing is closed, but they can give public comment, something like that. You can read him the riot act, how long this has taken and everything else.
Well, Max, can I ask
Yes.
something here? Is there, in the conditions that Tim wrote up and we're imposing as part of the conditional use, only because this property has started and stopped so many times, can we, and we talk generally with him in these hearings about the
Speed
schedule.
and speed. Yeah.
Is there something that we could put as part of our approval that if it's not occupied in 3 years from now, whatever, I don't even want to throw out what it is, but is there some way that this thing can have a finality if let's say a year from now, we don't see a thing happening.
Right, so there is a specific provision in the ordinance about how long you have for a conditional use to apply for a building permit or become occupied. So it's 2 years there, so we can't go below that.
Okay.
So you can't say 6 months or something. And we do have the one requirement that in 180 days to make the land development. But even that, I mean, you can't get a building permit until even later. And when you get a building permit, there is a built-in 180 days as well to commence construction, on that. But something 90 days. Oh, correct. Is it? For commercial or for residential?
For permit purpose.
No, yeah, call my contract.
I mean, whether we, if
3
we,
months. No, I'm
I
sorry.
guess my point is, if we zone it, that's not,
Oh, so.
I'd like to have some assurance that it's gonna actually happen.
It sounds like it's built in our ordinance, the timing of it.
Well, so, but to Tom's point,
Yeah.
if you have some, we come here again, I'm concerned about Judge James just saying the condemnation action should just, go away. He made mention about, well, you've got a gun pointed to his head, you can't operate like that for 2 years. That's the only way we got him to do this to begin with, so we need to, but I think he said it offended his sense of justice to have it, so I did take that as a breach.
It's not a good indicator.
So I can see something happening with that, and yeah, if there is, an amendment to the motion, to add an additional condition, We're not dealing with a resolution here. That's
I wouldn't want to do that if it wasn't permissible or it was, I mean, is there something we could add on as a condition that would, stand up against
Yes,
a court challenge?
I would say because, that 2 years is for applying for the building permit or getting the occupancy permit. There are other time periods involved. So if you said, be ready for, occupied by X date, and that is a condition. What happens if 2.5 years they're not under occupied? Do you pull it and all of a sudden everything's done? That becomes an issue. I mean,
There's landfill triggers too, so,
we have that.
we do, the trigger that we were missing was the time between the application of land development, and a deadline point, that's, we've done that, so everything else, there's alternate triggers built in for both building permit, requirements, zoning requirements, and land development requirements, so that's why I didn't really look to take that any further, so I think that, if we, watch those dates, I think we're gonna be in good shape.
So do we remind them during the hearing of those dates? Why don't we do that, especially for the purposes of,
I understand that communities, reservation just because of they've had so many false starts on that site. And that would be-
I think what you're saying is, let's for the people who have these reservations and these concerns, let's remind them there is this built-in timing system in place, and we're not. The conditional use application is step one. It's not the end of the approval.
And you're able to, because we just referenced Tim's staff report, and anybody wants to read through each item and just say, these are the conditions. Just so they don't, I don't know if they receive copies or other ones.
Something to that, or maybe could Tim, I know we're putting Tim on the spot, but could we just have Tim remind us of the timeline, assuming it gets approved. This is the time, this is the absolutely longest timeline that you have to actually produce a finished building. Here's what you got, here's the steps, and here's the timeline.
That's 2 years.
For the conditional use, the sort of lapses if you haven't done one of those, apply for building permit. Or
So I think we can walk it through the questions. So
I'm not gonna be able to give this very all specific dates on all the things that because we have, I'll speak in general terms, but, in fact, I was in for 2 years.
I like Max's idea of the other,
Yeah.
the conditions that you put in your staff report too, about the buffering and the fencing and all that stuff. You put that all in your. Yeah,
But sanitary sewer, approved sanitary sewer.
yeah.
Approved sanitary sewer. At what point does he have to provide that?
Oh, he'll have to provide that. We can't possibly, which was hired outside. So he's gonna have to, through the land development process, get that, and because that's the sewer authority will be looking at that too. So.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're getting short on time here, because 6 minutes.
Well, that's the end of my.
Okay, then why don't we go ahead and council report, Brian?
I'm good tonight.
Okay, Megan.
He did.
Good. Just one really quick one. I think Gary may have solved this. I got a call from Jim Lawrence today. Did you talk to Jim?
Yes,
But we can take.
yeah, there's communication lines going in over there. I went over there after work there 2 years, all those areas along Cole Road, Fountain Hills, there's flagging all through there. They're putting underground communication lines, and they're gonna be boring.
Jim called, just so you know what we're talking about. Jim called me and says, I can't believe this. We can never even find out what's going on. There's flags in everybody's yard. Nobody knows why the flags are there. I'm not giving you some of the, but no, I'm on for Jim on the spot, but he was really upset with it. And I said, well, Jim, I said, and this could be anybody, somebody could be putting a mailbox in and they call one call,
Yeah,
so you don't go through a utility line. I said, if you want, I'll call over. And while I was speaking to him, you were calling in.
Yeah.
He said, I gotta go, Gary's calling.
They do have a lot of flags over there. I'll tell you. There's thousands of them through there. I mean,
So that explains why today. So I guess the only takeaway from that is you'll probably, if the borough's doing something like, let's say we're, have a one call for curb replacement. Maybe we tell the neighbors that these flags are going in here because this is what we're doing.
Well, we've been sending out notices on our end of it, and that is a bad thing, that a lot of these communication companies they're not giving no, all we see is the one calls. When the one calls come in down here for us to check our side of it, that's the only thing we've seen, and they check, hey, that was just yesterday, so.
Okay, so that was his whole point. I don't, I think there's something that can find a way this flag is being put all over the street, some way. So I said I would bring it up to see them, so enough said.
Okay. The personnel committee meeting will be on April 19th.
April 19th at 6 o'clock, like a personnel committee meeting. We will have 50 employees shortly. We aspire to change the LA guidelines, and we have some other items we'd like to update. And the personnel policy handles, so we'll have that to the right line. Week before the
We have to have an executive session, but it will need to be after our meeting. Yeah. Being adjourned.
John, thanks on for that.